I know our society obsessed with numbers. When the world is talking about how many startups are becoming unicorn and how many organizations are creating $1 million revenue, my purpose is very simple. If all of you who are watching this video, if one person, just one person, that's what I care about, if your perspective could be changed about how you view success, then my purpose is definitely achieved with this goal. So by defining that goal with that, let's directly jump into the topic of today, which is, what does success look like to you? So it's a very interesting question because typically in our society, people obsess about success, right? And when we think about success, there are few people that we start visualizing or their face start coming up in front of our minds or eyes that, yes, these are the people who we call successful. So, of course, we have Jeff Bezos, the chairman and the leading person for Amazon, who's recently stepped down as a CEO, but still continues to be one of the wealthiest person on this planet. When we visualize what does success look like, people such as Jeff Bezos definitely stand out that, yes, he is a successful person. And then, of course, you get to see Mark Zuckerberg as well, the founder and CEO of Facebook. You would think and label Mark Zuckerberg as successful if I were to ask this question, what does success really look like to you? But the journey doesn't stop with Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, right? The journey actually continues with interesting people back home, with people such as business tycoons, such as Mukesh Ambani, who is the managing director and chairman of Reliance Industries Limited. So if these are the people or these are the faces that come on the top of your mind when I question you, what does success look like? Then we may also ask really interesting questions such as, what is the most searched item on YouTube? I'm not sure how many of you know the answer to this question, but if you were to check on YouTube or type on YouTube how to become X, the number one searched item on YouTube is how to become a millionaire. Not surprising, right? After we have just seen three faces that pop up on the top of our mind, on the top of our eyes, when we question what does success look like. And eventually, if we were to really quantify success and we have to build a framework around it, you will typically think of, and our society typically think of success on two axes. And it is unfortunately a travesty that when we think of success, we kind of bind ourselves on two axes. One is of wealth and second is of fame, right? And you would not be surprised that the three faces that I showed to all of you are on the top right quadrant of this axis, right? That they are really wealthy and they're really famous. But if this is what our limited conventional form of success is, that is how our society typically views what does success look like, then my question is, where do people such as Geeta ji really sit in? I met her in 2016 when I was working on Swachh Bharat mission with the government of India. And we were monitoring all the states and the districts. And very interestingly, we found that Mandi, which is a small district in Himachal Pradesh back in 2016, had ranked number 1 on the Swachh Bharat mission index in rural India. And I took it upon myself to go on ground and really figure out what was really happening in this small district called Mandi. Who were the people on ground who were really creating this change? And very interestingly, we found a bunch of women volunteers on ground who were not just creating an open defecation-free ecosystem so that people do not defecate outside, but were also creating a very sustainable ecosystem for solid and liquid waste management. But then I come back to the question, if success looks like the face of Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, then where do people such as Geeta ji really sit in? And that brings me to a very interesting story. And let me take you back to 2013, when I really started my career and my professional journey after my graduation. Let me take you to another village, which is called Mithun Kheda in Rai Bareli. So this is my first job. I was working as a boutique management consultant, and we were working for a client in solar. And while our client was really interested to actually electrify households through solar, they also interestingly wanted to electrify a small village which is through the technology called microgrids, that a grid is sustainable in itself so that they do not need to take electricity from the utility lines. And for that interesting feasibility or the flashy consulting work we did, eventually we had to go on ground and do a feasibility study as well. And that is when I had the most pivotal and the most transformative experience of my early 20s life. I met an 88-year-old lady. She came up to me and she asked with a lot of hope, with a lot of smile, and with a lot of happiness on her face, "Are you really going to electrify my village? Are you really going to electrify my village?" I still, till date, have not been able to forget that face with the hope and with the happiness she really asked me that question. Just imagine for a second being 88-year-old, almost more than half of your life is done, and you're still hopeful about bringing a positive change. That village, those people had never seen electricity ever since independence, and of course, ever during their lifetime. But this 88-year-old lady was really excited because she would get to see their grandchildren study with the advent of electrification of her village. And that is when I started really questioning early in my life, what kind of success do I want for myself? Does it have to be about just becoming a millionaire? Or does it have to be just about becoming LinkedIn top voice and becoming famous? And that is when I realized that success is not just two-dimensional. Success could be multi-dimensional as well. Success can have many faces. Your definition of success can look very different than my definition of success. And it could be really different for various people. But in this talk, I want to introduce a third axis of success to all of you, which is about positive axes. So what we are establishing in this talk is that success is not just about creating wealth, while wealth is absolutely important for your well-being. And success is not just about being famous also. It is definitely about creating a positive impact, social impact in your society. And as Aristotle famously had pointed out about the golden mean, I would nudge you to figure out how do you find a golden mean in your success axis so that you could actually find a balance on the extreme ends, fighting amongst themselves. Should you be just becoming wealthy? Should you just become famous? Or should you become positive impact? Should you just create positive impact? And that is where Aristotle very interestingly said, you need not just be fixated on one extreme. You could very beautifully find your own balance and you could find that golden mean. And how do you create that positive impact in the society? You start by solving a very interesting, meaningful problem. You start with a problem, and that is how you create a positive social impact in the society as well. In this lifetime, I have been really passionate about solving one problem. And that one problem that I have picked to solve for is unequal access to quality education. Unequal access to quality education. Let me show you certain photographs. This photograph of people living beneath a bridge in tents, you might imagine that this is of perhaps Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Vietnam, or any other developing economy. This is very interestingly a photograph of Washington, DC. And I took this photograph myself when I was on a journey in a recent trip. And this, by the way, is the capital of the wealthiest country on this planet. Just imagine what kind of education that child would be going through when he or she is living under the bridge in a tent. And while you may believe this is still better off because they have a tent, you have no idea perhaps the kind of temperatures that DC goes through in winters. They could be as sharp as -15 and -16. And while the problem is not just limited to developed countries, let me show you another photograph. This is the photograph, a very famous or a very common photograph, when I would work or go from my home in Uber to Resana Hills when I was working for Government of India. While you may feel or believe through this photograph that these children are getting educated because there is a right of education, but do we really think that's the kind of education that they deserve and that they need? And why am I now showing these photographs to all of you? Is because the education that is being imparted is not sufficient. More than 25% of the youngsters, graduate youngsters today in India, are unemployed. And that is not because they didn't go through education. The fundamental problem is that they did not go through a high quality education. They did not have the learning outcomes because of which they could get a decent job. And that brings me to my own personal story again. I am personally an output of great education and great opportunities. I will be extremely transparent in this talk. I have gotten to work with the UK Prime Minister to solve interesting problems in Middle East. I've gotten to work with BCG as a management consultant, especially for public sector. And I've also gotten an opportunity to work with Government of India on interesting good governance issues. And how did I land upon those rare opportunities? It's because I've been privileged with fantastic education institutes in my own lifetime. I graduated from St. Stephen's College, Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and then went on to Harvard Business School as well. While I really hope that you will forgive me if this sounds boastful, but there is absolutely nothing legendary about my career in my 20s. And there are still unachieved dreams and unachieved ambitions that I have as I'm moving towards my life in my 30s. But there is one thing that I have achieved, which is extraordinarily rare, which is that I have had a very fulfilling career in my 20s. And which is because I achieved at the golden mean, as Aristotle famously said, arriving at the golden mean on the success axis, which is creating social impact, becoming decently wealthy, and achieving some sort of fame in my 20s career. And because I have personally picked up education, providing quality education in this lifetime, let me talk about certain really novel ideas that could transformatively break or really change the ecosystem of education. The emerging technologies in education is a very novel concept because the technologies such as artificial intelligence, AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality could definitely be a game changer in the entire education space. Just recall the photograph that I showed to all of you of those poor kids in New Delhi who are perhaps getting education, but not the quality education. This is me at Harvard Business School when I was pursuing my curriculum there. Just imagine for a second those same kids get to experience Harvard Business School because of the advent of technologies such as augmented reality. They do not just get to see this photograph when they're learning, they get to experience Harvard Business School in 3-dimensional when they're sitting in classrooms. And you may question, Shatakshi, but why is that really needed, right? How would that really change the entire ecosystem of education? Because technologies such as this provide privileges, provide access to really rare privileges, which are available, unfortunately, to just less than 1% of the people on this planet. If we deploy these emerging technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality, students will be able to immerse themselves in the entire learning ecosystem. I am sitting in Boston right now, and I'm giving this talk on Zoom to all of you. I would not be surprised if few of you drop off in this talk. Why? Because you're not getting to see me in flesh and blood. Eventually, this might go on YouTube as well. And I would not be surprised that students eventually drop off in between the talk. But I bet you that the run rate at which the drop would take place would dramatically reduce if you were to imagine or view me in this talk in a 3-dimensional format. Or if this were viewed on eventually YouTube in a 3D format with augmented reality. And that's the kind of immersing experience that we're talking about. Absenteeism is a very big issue in education. Dropouts are a very big issue in education. And emerging technologies such as AR and VR could really be a novel concept, but they could really bring a transformative change in our entire education space. In terms of benefits, of course, there have been research studies which prove that deploying these emerging technologies could reduce cognitive load, could encourage higher engagement between the teacher and the student, and improve the memory recall as well. I take a full circle in this talk. Remember, I started with a goal in this talk, that my goal is very simple. I don't care about thousands. I don't care about millions. I don't care about billions. If just one person after my talk views success differently and would also believe that I also want to create positive impact in the society over and above becoming just wealthy and famous, my purpose is done. And why am I sharing that with all of you again? Because success starts small. You always start with one person and eventually it builds late over and over. 3 years ago, I started my own organization, and very similarly, I started with just one person. Almost 2 years ago, that one person looked something like these beautiful faces on the screen. And now we are able to together impact thousands of people through the emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence in the realm of education. I take a full circle by defining what is success for me, right? We are questioning what is success and we take a full circle, we come back on the axes that you have to find your own golden mean. There's a very typical question when people are pursuing their career. What is happiness? For me, happiness is a life of absolutely no regrets. I have very interestingly left a $130,000 job to just pursue or increase my balance towards the positive impact because I wanted to do something on ground and I wanted to genuinely create a positive impact in the society. My question to you would be, why don't you figure out on this 3-dimensional axis of success, where do you sit? And it is fine, right? Always you start small. You just start with one person and you start with yourself first. But you really figure out, are you high on fame, less on wealth and less on social impact? Are you high on social impact, less on wealth and less on fame? But are you finally moving towards that Aristotle golden mean? That's all my time with all of you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much.